You're listening to All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of All In. I hope you're doing really well and enjoying what's left of your summertime. I'm recording this on August 14th of 2015, so I'm looking at our summertime just drifting away and kind of missing it, to be honest with you. And this is connected in part with what I want to talk to you about on this week's podcast. Back around June, July, I was looking back over my goals. Every year in January, I spend a few days working on my personal goals for the upcoming year. And I set out 7 different goals that I had, and I was reflecting on those and looking at the progress I had made on some and the progress I hadn't made on others, and kind of feeling the pressure that, how it goes. I suppose that's why when most people make New Year's resolutions, they've forgotten them within the first week. It's easier to do it that way, but I haven't forgotten them. I just may not actually fulfill them all. But anyway, I was going over my goals and kind of feeling the pressure of getting the goals done, because I like to get things done. And during all of that, I heard someone on a podcast or something mention Kanter's law. Kanter's law comes from Kanter. Her name, Rosabeth Kanter, is a professor at Harvard Business School, and she had famously said one time, everything can look like a failure in the middle. And when I heard that, I thought, that's exactly what I feel like right now. I feel like everything can look like a failure in the middle, because I was right in the middle of life. I was right in the middle of a lot of stuff happening, and it was messy. It's what we like to call the messy middle, and it really is messy. See, we love inspiring beginnings, and we all love happy endings. But it's that messy middle that messes us up. And in the middle of all of that, we do need to cling to God's promise in Philippians 1 verse 6, where he says that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ. Now, I don't know how to interpret that verse completely, because that phrase, until the day of Christ, seems to indicate that there are some things God is doing in you and I that will not end in death, that he's going to keep working it. I don't get it. I just live with it. And you and I have this exciting promise from God that whatever he has begun in us, he will carry that on to completion. But boy, I tell you, when you're living in the messy middle, it's easy to lose sight of that. So here I was, going through my annual goals, and they were just staring at me, saying, "What are you going to do about this?" And not only that, I began to feel the pressures coming off of vacation and now getting ramped back up into the work mode of, the various projects that I'm working on, everything from this podcast to some budget issues to some personnel situations, someone dealing with a spouse with cancer, various crises around the world that we're having to navigate through, some personnel that we're in the process of helping deploy to various countries and throughout Europe. And then, of course, you've got home. I'm only home for a few weeks in the States here in August, and I've got all the home projects, everything from my apple trees that need to be picked to some trees that need to be trimmed to a chicken coop I need to build for one of my daughters, and dentist and a doctor and all sorts of crazy things, just like what you have to live with every single day. And then I was feeling the pressure of this meeting that I've got coming up in Romania. And then I've got a leadership seminar I'm supposed to do in September in Bulgaria. And then we have a missionary retreat coming up in just a couple of weeks in Albania. And then a couple of churches that I'm going to be speaking at real soon. And then I have a workshop that I'm going to be doing at a pastor's conference here in a few weeks. And in the middle of all of that, I'm training for my very first marathon. Yeah, that's right. Crazy me. One of my 7 goals that I'd set for my life for 2015 was to run my first marathon. And right in the middle of it, my knee starts acting up again. An old injury from years ago, I suppose, and started acting up. And then so you've got all of that going on, and then, the backlog of work that happens while you go on vacation. Unfortunately, work doesn't go on vacation, and so it just kind of piles up and builds up. And so I had a whole backlog of stuff happening. And to add pressure to that was a writing project I had fallen behind schedule on that just was is taking longer than I had anticipated. And so all of that was just ramping itself up, and I just kept reminding myself of Kanter's law. Everything feels like a failure. Everything looks like a failure in the middle. So Tuesday of this week, it's in the evening, and it's evening time. I go out in my garage to grab something, and as I walk out the door, and I look on the ground, and there's some water on the garage floor, and lo and behold, my hot water heater has gone out on me and has started leaking. And so that, of course, goes into crisis mode, and end up shutting that down, turning the water off to it, and making sure that I'm going to have a major disaster on our hands. And I go back inside and tell Debbie, my wife, about it. And a little bit later, I'm just kind of thinking I'm just going to go upstairs and read for a little bit. And so about 8:15, I said, "Honey, I'm just going to go up and read for a little while." She gives me that cute little smile she gives me, because she knows normally when I say I'm going to go read, it means I'm going to go stare at a book for about 3 seconds and then fall asleep. Well, this time I was planning actually to go to bed early enough that I wasn't going to fall straight asleep, and I was going to actually be able to read a book that I was working through. So I head up the stairs, get to the top of the stairs, and I hear this strange noise, this dripping sound. And I go into the bathroom, and I find I've got a shower that's leaking like a sieve. So, of course, that sends another crisis mode happening of trying to fix this problem. I got a hot water heater that's downstairs leaking. Now I got this faucet upstairs leaking. It's like, when it's raining, it's pouring, it seemed like. And so it was all this crazy stuff, and I worked on that for a while, and then just realized I'm going to have to fix this stuff in the morning, call the people that I need to call to see if they can come get these things fixed, because some of it I could fix, others I didn't want to deal with. So I went to bed, didn't get to do my reading, and then of course Wednesday comes around, and at 3:22 a.m. I'm wide awake in bed, and so I can't go back to sleep because I've got all this stuff running through my head about what I need to do and about the problems with all of that. And again, everything is looking like a failure in the middle. So 3:22, I'm wide awake. I toss and turn like a door on a hinge. Finally get out of bed about an hour later and go downstairs and start working on things, and just kind of really feeling that pressure of life in the middle. It had been building, not just because of the 2 water crises that I'd had the night before, but just kind of building up. Middle of the year, middle of a bunch of goals, middle of work, middle of life, all just kind of crashing in on me, and I wasn't able to sleep like I needed to be able to sleep. And so I started practicing some disciplines that I had learned from various people, including David Allen in his great book, Getting Things Done. And so I just sat down with my journal and a little notepad that I use. And I just began to, first of all, capture and clarify everything that was on my mind. The whole list of everything, every little thought that I had running through there, because your mind is a great place for creating ideas, but it's a terrible place for keeping them. And you know what that's like. You'll forget. At least I know I do. I can't remember it, and I can create it, come up with the idea, but I have to write it down so I can get it out of my mind onto the sheet of paper. And so I started writing everything down that I needed to do. So I was capturing the idea and clarifying what it is, and then I began to prioritize these things. Maybe picking the apples off of the apple tree isn't as important as fixing the leaky faucet and fixing the broken hot water heater, because you realize how precious hot water is when you don't have any. And that's what I was experiencing. So I started prioritizing it. And then as soon as the repair shops opened up, I called the first one. I'd already called a guy that's a plumber friend of mine handyman, and he wasn't able to get out here. And this is what I was afraid of, is that these were all going to be things that, of course, everybody's busy and working. It's going to be a few weeks. So everybody's saying, no, it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks before I can get out there. So that's adding to the pressure. And then, of course, the leaky faucet. I could fix that myself, even though I didn't want to. I was willing to, at that moment, pay somebody else. I thought it was a good, fair trade, and ended up not being so. So I get a hold of a friend of mine and said, hey, have you ever replaced a hot water heater? He says, yeah, I've done it before. It's no problem. Great. And he offered to come over and help me. So I went and bought a new hot water heater, and I bought the part necessary to fix the faucet. And anyway, all of that came out of this whole process of, one, identifying or capturing and clarifying exactly what each one of these pressure points were, things that were messing with my mind, taking my sleep, taking my peace, then prioritizing it. And then I identified, the third thing I did was I identified the next action to take. Say the hot water heater, the next action to take was call the company that I use when I've got furnace and problems and stuff like that. They do a hot water heater and furnaces and stuff. I called them, and they said, no, it can't be there. Okay, next item, contact my friend who can do this, who's been able to do this kind of stuff in the past. But you don't want to call that in unless you absolutely have to. And of course, he's a good friend of mine, so it was no problem. But reducing the crisis to the next physical action, because that's what gives you the power. If you're just thinking about it, and you feel paralyzed, you're not able to do anything because you don't even know what you're supposed to do. But reduce it down to the next physical action that you can take. So I was going through each one of those, and I tell you, by the end of that day, and this was Wednesday of this week, by the end of Wednesday, not only had I fixed the leaky faucet, and my friend came over and we replaced the hot water tank. I'd gone down to McClendon's Hardware, and I bought a new hot water tank, and we had it in there, and we ended up sitting out on the back porch afterwards, having dinner together, laughing and talking about good things in life. And the crisis that I'd had Tuesday had become a great moment of celebration on Wednesday. But I tell you, in the middle of it, it felt like a terrible failure. So I was going through this process of capture and clarify, then prioritize each one of those things. And you prioritize based on both, what's on fire needs to be fixed immediately, and then you prioritize based on what is your energy level at, when are you best to fix this particular issue. And then you go into the schedule mode, and when am I going to do all of these different things. So I ended up with a list here there were probably 20 items on that list that I needed to do. And they ranged from the mundane of replying to emails to life critical issues of people with terrible disasters in their lives, and all of those things. What is the next physical action? And scheduling each one based on priority and best time to do it. And then the fifth thing that I did with it was act. Until you actually take action on it, there's not much else happening. And when you act on it, that's when you feel the empowerment flowing from you to it so that you can fix it. Also, during the week, I had been reading a book called The Ascent of a Leader, and in there they give this quotation from Robert Clinton. Robert Clinton is a professor of leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary. And they had a quote that just scared the heebie-jeebies out of me, because Robert Clinton said, based on all of his research, he estimates that 70% of all leaders do not finish well. Now let that sink in for a minute. 70% of all leaders do not finish well. And I get to thinking about that in connection with this thing that I've been going through and thinking through in my own mind about the messy middle. And I really do believe that it is the messy middle that causes the destruction of that 70% of all leaders. They start well. They really do start off with great ambition and great hope and dreams for the future. But somewhere in that messy middle, they lose their vitality, they lose their focus, they lose the very thing that set them in the course that they were going. So, looking back on this experience for this week, and what are the things that I saw both working for me and putting into practice and cultivating that I wanted to share with you. I would call these 3 habits to cultivate in your messy middle. And the first habit is reflection. I sat down with my journal and stack of papers and just began to reflect on, here's what's pressing me, here's what's waking me up at 3:22 in the morning. Begin to reflect on it. What is it? Why is it happening? What do I need to do about it? What's next? When am I going to do it? Just reflecting, but you must be able to name and identify. It's one of the great things that God gave to Adam. God placed Adam in the garden. He said, I want you to name everything. If you can't name it, you can't fix it. If you can't name it, you can't lead it. You have to be able to name and identify what it is that you, my friend, are working with and working towards. So reflection on it. The second habit that you want to develop is refocusing, because you drift. Remember, have you ever had your car go out of alignment? Remember back in when I was younger, cars seemed to go out of alignment a lot more often than they do today. Maybe it's because I'm not hitting as many curbs and things in my older life as I did in my younger life. It seemed like back then we were always having to readjust the alignment on our cars. But you lose your focus. You've set a goal at the beginning of the year. Maybe you do like I do, and you set 5 to 7 big goals, big, hairy, audacious goals for your life for the coming year. And in the middle of it all, you forget it, and you lose traction, you lose hope, and you say, "Oh, I'll just forget it. I'll try again next year." Well, we drift. Well, taking time to reflect and then to refocus helps us get back on track with those original goals. And then the third habit that we cultivate is the habit of renewing. When I'm training for this marathon, and my knee started acting up, went on a run, it started hurting really bad. I could have said, just bag it. If we're going to forget it, not going to do it. But I'm not going to do that. I need to treat it. I need to make sure I keep it iced. I need to make sure I'm doing all the proper things with it, giving it the rest that it needs. But I need to renew my actions. I need to make sure that I stay on top of things, getting those actions up and running again. Because when you drift or you coast, it's sometimes getting the movement back going. It's like I'll go for a long run, and then if I need to pause or take a stop, either to take a bathroom break or get some water or something like that, getting started again can be hard. And that's the whole thing. Though, you've got to renew the action. So reflecting, refocusing, and renewing. Now let me wrap this all up with you, giving an illustration of something I saw when I was doing some research for this. I thought about doing an analogy between life in the messy middle compared to what's it like to get lost in the woods, because it's very common for us in the messy middle to not be able to see the forest because of all of the trees. So I was wondering, hey, what do you need to do if you're lost in the woods? So I asked Google, and I typed in what to do if lost in the woods, and it was really funny. There's some great advice in there, and some of it differs based on context and your needs and stuff like that. But the first one in each one of them that they all had in common was the first action to do if you are lost in the woods is stop. Because you go into a panic and you want to start running, and that's the worst thing you can do. I like the quote that I saw, that a calm head is better than a calm head on your shoulders is better than a big backpack on your back. And it really is true. The first thing you need to do when you're lost in the woods or you're in the messy middle is stop. Collect your thoughts. Don't panic. Don't quit. Don't give up. But just stop. Just stay put. And of course you get your food, your water, your shelter, your fire. Now, as you're going through your messy middle, what are you doing? How are you going to do? What do you need to do right now? Do you need to stop? Do you need just to say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes identifying, naming the very things that are consuming my energy, my focus, my time, stealing my sleep, my peace, my strength. Spend some time reflecting. Look at it. Look around, make observations, listen, learn from these things. As you go through this reflecting and refocusing process. And then what actions do you need to take? What's the thing that is tripping you up that you're not acting on? Well, go act on it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. Also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to this podcast in iTunes. Leave us some feedback. Give us your thoughts, your inputs about how we can continually serve you and improve how we are doing this podcast. Thanks, guys. God bless you.
Well, we're done now. Thanks for listening. This is Jeff Roper reminding you that the mission of God is too grand for mediocrity or average living. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose is found in the mission of God. It's your life. Now go live it.